Hi, I'm Luke. Welcome to DB Clips. Today we're going to look at the question, isn't Christianity just a set of rules that I have to follow to get to heaven? One of the first classes I took in college was an overview of world religions. What the class actually should have been called, based on the content, is that Christianity is like every other religion, and really all religions are the same and not real. This attitude is fairly prevalent in our society. The instructor would use examples of how nearly every ancient culture or religion had a flood type of story, or how each had a creation myth. And the fact that you see this everywhere, to me, is actually a sign that the things in the Bible really did happen. You're just seeing from other cultures their own explanation for what it is that they saw and was passed down. From this perspective, if you didn't look any further, you would probably conclude the same thing. Every religion is just the same, a set of moral codes or rules that we have to follow to prove we're good people and should go to whatever version of heaven we believe in. So let's take a moment to examine some of the prominent religions in the world. In Islam, you get to heaven by living righteously and doing good deeds throughout your life. Your station or reward in heaven will depend on what you did in your life. In Hinduism, you're reincarnated until you've accumulated enough good deeds for enlightenment and entrance into the afterlife. Now, this also results in the belief that your current life reflects your deeds from your past life. If your life is terrible, you actually deserve it. Most Mormons will tell you that they're really Christians and have all the same beliefs. The truth in Mormonism is that when you die, you will be judged on the general goodness of your soul. And if you live a good enough life, you will become a god of your own world. The commonality in everything thus far is how good a life you live will determine what happens to you. And if you ask the majority of Americans if they're going to heaven, those that believe in a heaven will say yes. And the reason that most will give for this is that they're basically a good person. So what is the difference about Christianity? Isn't it also just a list of rules you have to follow? Well, let's start with what's the same. 2 Corinthians 5:10 says that for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. And based off of most people's assumptions that they're basically good people, we can see why most would say, I'm going to heaven. This very premise, though, is based on a false assumption. We think it's like a scale, where a good deed and a bad deed will cancel each other out. This isn't even true in our daily life, though. If I were to go into a store and steal something and get arrested, I can't go before the judge and say, well, look, I helped this person out who was in need, so I really shouldn't be punished for my theft. And it's the same way with God. If God is a just God, then every evil deed must be punished. And Romans 6:23 tells us that the wages of sin is death. When we sin or do wrong, we are in essence rejecting God and his authority over our life, and we place a wall between us and God with our sin. The requirement for heaven isn't more good than bad, it's a life without sin. When God gave the law to the Israelites, there was a sacrifice required for every sin. Someone had to pay the price. And Isaiah 65:6 says that all our righteousness are as filthy rags. And this brings us to the problem. If God is just, sin must be punished. And if all sin leads to separation from God for eternity in hell, how are we supposed to go to heaven? How can God be loving and send us all to hell? And this is the crux of the difference between Christianity and every other religion. When there was no way to get back to our relationship with God, God made a way. Philippians 2 tells us that Jesus emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of a man. He came down and lived the only perfect life, a life without sin. Jesus was the only one who lived a life worthy of going to heaven because he did no wrong. And what happens next in Jesus' life is the most heartbreaking and beautiful thing that ever has or will happen. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, for our sake he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. If God is just, sin must be punished. So he did the only thing he could do. He became a man and took the punishment that we deserved, so that when we stand before God to be judged, we are washed by the blood of Jesus, meaning his punishment took the place of our punishment. So we are seen as holy because of his holiness. So what is required of us then? Romans 10:9 says that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. The difficulty here comes not from the act, but what is required inside of us. To give up the idea that we can save ourselves and to accept that Jesus is the only way. To acknowledge that God is the Lord of our life. The requirement on us is the surrender of ourselves to the only one who loves us more than we love ourselves. The truth of every other religion is that they are basically a way to invalidate God's part in our life and find our own way to heaven. Every other religion is at its core a rebellion against God to say, no, I'll find my own way. If you want to learn more about this, you can go to our website, dbcc.com, click on the Grow link and then Sermons. And if you look for the sermon series titled Believe the Gospel of John, you can look for the sermon titled What You Need Most. Thank you for joining us today. God bless.